Welcome back to the Impact 1 Million podcast, From Success to Significance. And I'm your host, Shar Moore. Today, I'm joined by Michale Gabriel. She is a Parent Choice Award winning performer, international best-selling author, and founder, CEO of Story by Design. She is a story shaper, inspirational keynote speaker, leadership consultant, storytelling coach, and workshop facilitator. Michale has been engaged professionally in the art of storytelling for over 40 years in the fields of education, healthcare, international diplomacy, and multinational business in the US, Central America, India, Russia, Ukraine, Uganda, Iraq, and across the US. And my gosh, Michale has such a story to share for us today. So listeners, get ready. And Michale, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be on your program, Shar. I've been looking forward to this.
So have I. You have so many powerful stories to share of your own, let alone the ones you've helped others share. So Michale, take us back to, when did this all start for you? When did you find that this was your calling?
Well, I would have to go all the way back to childhood, actually. And I love this Mark Twain quote that says, there are two important things in life, the day you were born and the day you figured out why. But for me, Shar, my love of story and my understanding about the healing aspect of story and the ability for story to change a person's life actually occurred in my own life in childhood. And I was raised in a single parent family in Anchorage, Alaska, older brother, younger sister, and mom. And times were difficult. There was a lot of stress. My mother was deeply depressed. And what I would notice, however, is that when my mother would place us on the hide-a-bed in the living room, which was the couch, but also her bed, and would read to us aloud, that gave all of us the opportunity to step into the magic of story and leave the rest of the stress and everything else that was going on in the household behind and step into the magic of story. And so for me, from early on, story was a source of comfort. It was a source of hope. I remembered when my third grade teacher, Mrs. Norton, would read aloud to us in class. And when I was reading myself, I was gravitating toward books like The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder, about a family that goes through challenging times, and yet they don't separate, they don't split, they stay together, which was the absolute opposite of what I was experiencing in my home life. And stories like Charlotte's Web, that was all about friendship and loyalty and taking care of one another. So, and then I would write stories of my own. And so from early on, I knew stories had power. I knew stories were important to me. I knew I loved to write them. I loved to tell them. I loved to read them. But I had no idea then that this is what I would end up doing with the rest of my life. A good portion of it, at least, about the last 50 years.
My goodness, that's amazing, Michale. And it's interesting because it was like something within you just clicked.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
it was a knowing. So
it
if
was a knowing.
yeah, friends are watching this and some people haven't clicked yet. They haven't got that knowing, or more to the point, Michale, I don't believe that people trust their knowing. So what would you say?
Mm-hmm.
How would you speak about that to people listening?
That's such a great question, Sharon. I would say to people, there's a line that I love from indigenous cultures, and it goes something like this. This is a good day to fly and a good day to die. And what that phrase actually means is that on those days when you are truly in the zone, when you are truly feeling alive and energized, that's a pretty good indication that your why is somewhere in there. So I often say to people, let's just do a little bit of excavating and searching, and let's go back in time and let's look at those moments where you felt most alive. Those moments where you felt like that you were doing what you're being called to do. And even though you may not have called it that, or you may not have been able to isolate that incident and go, that's part of my why, or that's part of my purpose, those are still moments that we need to spend some time on and ask ourselves, so what was it about that? And what was going on? And how did I feel? And what I've discovered in my work with people, especially coaching one-on-one, helping people find their deeper story, that as we begin to do that unearthing process, what emerges is a fuller and more complete picture of who we are and what we're meant to do in the world. In fact, many people have said to me, and I've worked with over 10,000 people in my workshops and one-on-one, and they said things like, I don't know if I have a story. I don't know if life's all that interesting. I said, well, you let me be the judge of that. And we start to have this conversation, and a couple things happen. Number one, when we are listening deeply to another human being, that allows the deeper story to come forth. When people feel safe, when they feel heard, they can begin to express more of themselves. And part of the process, and this comes from me bringing literature to life for the first 15 years as a professional storyteller, after I received a call through a meditation to create peace in the world through story. And it was a strong enough call that I quit my job. I just finished directing a $2.8 million campaign for the School of International Studies at the University of Washington and stepped out with no strategy and no plan as a professional storyteller. Though I had had a background in children's library services. I was the director of children's services. And I had used story to raise all that money. But this was different. This was different. This was going out into the world. This was creating peace through story and all of that. So what I say to people is, let's just take a look at your life in relation to what you're sharing with me. And then at the end of our sessions, because of my background in bringing literature to life all over the world, I actually reflect back to the person the story I'm hearing. But I do it in a storytelling way, based on all the experience that I've had of taking stories and figuring out from the written, how do I communicate this orally in a way that allows an audience, a listener, to lean in and to activate their imagination? Because I know to the extent that that happens, the message of that story will stick long past the telling. And so when I work with people and I'm able to tell their story back to them in a storytelling way with the experience I bring to the table, they'll say things like, oh my God, that's really, that's my story. And then they'll sometimes say, well, could you just tell it for me? Because I like how you do it. I said, no. I'm just showing you this amazing life that's yours. And I am giving you the opportunity to experience your story told through the mouthpiece of another so that you can really hear it and feel it and experience it in real time. And as you own that, and that begins to weave its way through your being, and you start to speak, you will speak differently because your story will be fully realized inside of you. And that's been the nature of the work that I do.
Oh, Michelle, I know you've just touched me. Friends watching, that spoke to you. I know it did. Drop us a comment and let us know, because you just took us all on a journey. And often people say it's not what you say to people, it's how you make them feel. But it's through the words and the power of story that you've all made us feel a certain way right now about our life. And I know when I've got off stage, when I first started speaking many years ago about my childhood situation, I was originally speaking to be victim. Because when you're starved of attention and being visible, you were unseen, unheard, you drew people in so that they could feel sorry for you and fill that cup. And then I went and learned how to be a professional speaker. And I realized that when I could craft my story in such a way that was powerful and true, but also allowed the person to place themselves into a moment, into a situation, I had
right.
a line of people waiting to talk to me because I always say on any stage, doesn't matter how large or small, I've come here today for one person. And if that's you, please come and meet me after. There's a line of people out the door saying, I'm the one, I'm the one. And it makes them feel that anything is possible. And that's the power of our own stories. And here's what I want to touch on, Michelle, because we have a publishing house. We are putting together the most exceptional hardcover coffee table book. And we're drawing in and calling in 100 people from all walks of life, man, woman, and child, to share their knowledge. But this is one thing I come up with a lot, and I'm sure you have as well. And you said it, touched on it earlier. I speak to so many people and interview them for this book, and they'll often say, oh, Shar, I don't think my story is very interesting. I haven't lived enough. I haven't done enough. I'm not the same caliber as others in the book. They don't even know some of the people in the book, but they're putting them on a pedestal. How do we, with friends listening today, what advice can you give them around understanding that when we live our story, we will always downplay it because it's ours. We know it. It's too familiar. Right?
That's right.
Stars in the day. I have no formal qualifications. I've achieved some exceptional things in corporate and in business. And with what we're doing now, we're about to do a world tour and go and take our life on the road. And people often look at that and say, you're lucky. And I don't downplay those things. I've launched a TV show. And so when people talk to you about their story, what do you say to them? How do you encourage them to understand and harness the power of their life? Their moments? What do you say?
Well, you know what? I just, first of all, I believe everybody has a story. I also, we do look at that core wounding. For me, I was very much emotionally abused growing up. I became my mother's mother at age 8. And when my mother went to court, divorcing my father, I spent 40 days getting her prepared to go to court. And in those days, kids testified. Here I was testifying against the father whose love I desperately wanted. And so that's a part of that, you know, Shar. But when I work with people who have the simplest of stories that have been so well received, and not even realizing. And so let me give you an illustration of that. One of my workshop participants in a leadership program that I've supported at the Boeing Company, 3 gold standard leadership programs that my work has been a part of, because every leader needs to be an effective storyteller. But we were chatting and he said, you know, Michelle, I don't have such an exciting blah, 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 you know, that thing. And so I just said, well, let's just talk. And ultimately, what came out of that conversation and the coaching that followed was that his grandfather was a pivotal person in his life. His grandfather, he would spend summers on the farm. His grandfather it was one of those waste not, want not kinds of people. He had his, in the house, he had his office was in the attic. Can you imagine? And so here he is at the top of the stairs going down to the basement, and he puts a ladder across to the attic, and he crawls this wiry man across this ladder, and he has little jars with screws and bits of wire and all this and that, you know, to be able to use it again and repurpose it. He's giving me all of this detail. It is so rich and so interesting, and it's just a story, right? So, I mean, it's an incredible story, a powerful story. I said to him, now, what is it you do again for the Boeing Company? He said, well, I'm in process improvement. I said, aha. And I just wonder how much Grandpa had to do with that. And he went, oh my God. He said, Michelle, I never put those things together. And what happened was that story just got deeper and richer. And he tells it to this leadership group, right? As part of our graduation exercise of 3 days. Everyone is like, wants to meet his grandpa. By that time it passed. But what happened to him was that he then began to understand why the work he was doing in the world was so important to him, because of what he'd experienced from his grandfather. And I said to him, now, you know, here's the thing. Next time you gather a group of people together to discuss some kind of process improvement that you want to accomplish, start it out by telling them the story of your grandpa, because they're going to now understand the why behind what you're doing.
Wow.
And they're going to understand where you're coming from on this. You're not just ticking a box because I have to go do it. It's a part of the fiber of your beingness. And by telling this story, they will understand that. So, and then I said, and get back to me. So he did go out. The next group he was working with, he calls me up. He said, Michelle, it was absolutely unbelievable. I started it. He said, we were accomplishing things on day 1 that we normally never got to until day 3. And he said, people were coming up to me and sharing stories about people in their lives that had influenced them and touched them. And he said, but what's happened to me by telling this story is I feel like my grandfather is in me. And I feel his presence every day now. In every conversation and everything that I embark on, all the lessons, even beyond that experience that he provided for me. And he said it has caused me to connect with my own self in a way that I haven't before.
Wow.
Now, those are and sometimes I think, Shar, we need to let people know that a story doesn't have to be a big dramatic, oh my, I went through all this and whatever, because that's where we start comparing and we start thinking, well, my story's not good enough. Plus, we all do that to ourselves. I've done that to myself, Shar, about my own story. I remembered a woman said to me once, hey, years ago, she said, Michelle, when you tell stories out of books, I really like it, but when you tell stories about yourself, not so interesting. And I'm going, are you kidding me? And of course, she just tapped into my deepest sense of being invisible and not being worthy. And I went, oh my goodness. And I didn't share for a long time. Can you imagine? I let that stupid comment affect me. And so I'm really vigilant about the language people use and about how they describe themselves. But my job really, as I see it, and the work that I'm doing, finding peace with your own story, is the more that I can help a person unearth stories from their past, and I can mirror back the largesse of their lives and let them experience it in a storytelling way, it actually changes how they see themselves. And the stories that come forth are grounded, not in comparing to anybody else, but grounded within themselves, their own values, what matters to them, and their messaging. And so I always say to people, let's talk about how your story might stick to another person and how might that inspire them or influence them or contribute to them. And because I have people actually, storytelling is a process. We tell our stories more than once. They change over each telling. And so as we get feedback, we start to find out how they're sticking to someone else. When I was storytelling for children for the first 15 years all over the world and created a program called Young Storytellers for Peace, took children to the former Soviet Union, to Russia, Ukraine, and teachers the next year. I would always pay attention after a day of school performing. I would be out of my car putting the books, because I'm a former librarian, I really want kids to go to the shelf and start reading and storytelling. And I was doing school residencies. But when I would be putting my books away, and I would hear children talking to their parents who were picking them up. And I would hear a kid say, Mom, the storyteller came today. Her name is Michale Gabriel. And she told a story about this little boy. His name was Epaminondas, Mama. And his little boy, he didn't follow directions very well. But you know what, Mama? His mama loved him anyway. And they're going on. And I'm hearing all over the schoolyard. And that's when I know I've done my job. Because if that story can stick to that child or to any adult, it has the potential to transform them. It has the potential to provide healing for that person. Because what sticks to us changes us. And so for me, it's how to craft a story for oral telling, not so much writing, but oral telling, in a way that the listener is invited in and their imagination is activated, and the healing message of that story can find fertile ground in that person. And then you let go of it. And if it's meant to do its work, and hopefully it does, it's like when I would come to a school 3-5 years later and kids were retelling to me stories I told when they were in, first grade, I remember thinking to myself that I want to make sure the stories I'm telling are worthy of staying in a child's mind and heart for that many years.
Wow.
So and that's true for us as adults. Are we telling stories that are worthy of staying in a person's mind and heart? Or do we need to make some shifts in how we tell our stories so that they are worthy of staying in someone's mind and heart?
Such a great question. Oh my gosh, Michelle, so many great points there. And I need to watch this back when it's ready, because there's so many things you've said in there that I want to actually take notes about. It's such a great question. Are we sharing stories that are worthy? And here's, we're not going to stop progress. And AI is a big thing that's running around at the moment. And lots of people are popping things in AI and pumping it out there on socials and on sites. And they're printing books fully written by AI with none of them in it. And look, AI has its place, of course. Every one of us needs to embrace, or of course you get left behind. I know myself, when I've gotten the team to produce some things for us in our media agency that's AI, and it hasn't been Sharonized. I look at the stats, right? We look at the response, and we know that it does well, but it doesn't do exceptionally well. And then before we came on today, as I was sitting there half ready, I had a coffee and I felt compelled to get my phone out and take a photo of me, makeup on, hair still wet, ready to be dried. And I felt called and compelled. I picked my phone up without hesitation and I just started typing out a post. And it doesn't matter it doesn't matter how many people like it. I'm not looking for that dopamine hit. What I know, though, is that I was writing that for one person somewhere in the world. Right. Sometimes they show themselves, sometimes they don't. But here's the thing. That's right. Recently, I was on another global podcast called Food Matters, and amazing lady. And they've got millions of followers. And again, I only do it for one person. And I recorded the interview maybe 5 months ago. I was 5 months earlier into that impact book that we're doing now's journey. And it only recently came out. And I had someone reach out to me last week and say they cried through my podcast, not because they felt sorry for me and my story. They cried because they realized that finally someone had given them permission to be themselves. And this woman is nearly 60. And I didn't know that she would be my one. I hadn't nearly 60 years of living on this planet. She hadn't allowed herself permission to be her. And I freed her from whatever someone had told her. As you say, one comment. I was told as a child, you're just an Indian girl. Just get married at 16, that's all you're good for, right? Yes. Business, corporate and life and a happy marriage and travel and grandkids and all the things I have now were not meant to be part of that life. But inside, I knew that was not my reality. And when we give voice to our legacy, which is what I want to touch on as we wrap up today, Michelle, that the impact book, impact is all about important action. That's how you create impact. The word itself, important action. That's when we know we're working towards a legacy. How will we be remembered? The last few years in the pandemic, I got sent back to my naughty corner, I think like everyone, with a big global reset of all the things I said I'll do one day. One day was taken away from all of us. Travel plans, family plans, 50th celebrations in Italy, all these things just stopped. And I decided no longer will I wait to launch the Girlfriend Hour TV show. No longer will I wait to put this coffee table book together. I don't own tomorrow. I'm doing it today, if not yesterday. It's already too late. I want to commit people's stories and knowledge to history, because when people read this book in 50, 80 years from now, we have created a legacy by documenting their wisdom, their lens of the world, their powerful story, their moments at 2 a.m. when things haven't gone well. What did they do? Why, Michelle, do you think, for our listeners today, can you tell them why it's so important to give voice to our legacy?
Wow. Well, and I think I speak about this from a different perspective because I will be 78 in June in just a couple weeks. And so at this stage of the game, it's not like I have that a lot of years ahead of me. I have no idea how long, how many years. But for me, it is, am I suiting up each day and contributing love and caring and listening to story? I mean, this is my calling. And I think for myself, especially with the pandemic and everything that was happening, sure, I didn't want to do online work. I'm used to being in person and feeling people's energy and seeing transformation happen every time I turn around. And it just wasn't, I needed to think a little differently. And I just finished teaching my first online class, and transformation did happen, and people lives were impacted. And we did have our private coaching, but our group support as well. So for me, I really want every day from this point forward, and how I judge my days is this a good day to fly? And is this a good day to die? Because when I have truly been of service to someone, when I've been able to help them see the greatness of who they are, when I've been able to help a person shape and craft their story so they can go out and affect the lives of thousands and thousands of people, I know that this is my legacy. And what I also know, and I appreciate what you said about the one, I would perform in schools and I would bring children out of the audience sometimes to help me tell stories. And I would always ask, give me the child who needs this the most. Give me the child, direct me to the child that by standing up here and interacting with me, they become the star. They become the storyteller. Kids are walking, along the hall and greeting them after when they didn't even know their name. I always say that. And that's exactly what would happen. That in order for me to be with that one child, working with children at Children's Hospital, where kids were, some of them dying. A little girl said to me, I was just massaging her feet one day, Mandy, and she said, Michelle, are you she was 11. She said, and had a very rare form of cancer. She said, Michelle, are you going to tell my story after I'm gone? I said, oh, Mandy, I said, I would be honored to if you want me to. She said, oh, I want you to. She said, I want people to know that my life counted.
Oh.
She said, I'm letting the doctors do a lot of experimental testing on me. And the reason I'm doing it, she said, is that children don't have to suffer as I have. Out of the mouth of an 11-year-old. But then a couple of weeks later, and she was terminal at this point, her mother called me and she said, Michelle, she said, Mandy is wanting to sign up to do another test, another experimental test. She knows she's near the end. She understands that. And she said, it's going to be painful. It's going to be difficult. And she said, she won't listen to me, but she'll listen to you because she loves you. So could you talk to her? And I'm remembering this conversation I had with her. I said, Mama, I don't want her to do it either. But your daughter has crafted a reason for her life.
Yeah.
She has identified her why. Yeah. And we must honor that. And we must allow her to do what she needs to do to fulfill what she has determined, not anybody else, what she has determined is the purpose of her life. Her mother, to her credit, allowed it, and she left us about 3 weeks later.
Oh, Michelle.
So, Shar, when I think about my life, like on my deathbed, trust me, I have been doing this lately anyway, because I've been identifying my next work and I want to work with people who have a story to tell, but what need my help in being able to unearth it and then to craft it in a way that's really going to land and stick in the minds and hearts of others. That is my purpose. That is my calling. And when I can do that on a daily basis, Shar, I know I'm doing exactly what I need to be doing in support of my own legacy, which is helping people to be visible, to be seen, and to be valued.
Love that.
My core wounding has become of not feeling seen and having to anticipate what everybody else was feeling in order to even survive in a very emotionally toxic household. My core wounding is my greatest strength, because I can help others to be seen and valued and to know their story matters.
Oh, I love that. Michelle, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. And I know
Thank you.
everyone watching and listening will feel the same. How can people reach out to find you?
Well, they can find me at michalegabriel.com. I'm also on social media on Facebook. I'm getting better, Shar, about posting. I admire you. I see your posts and I go, darn, I need to be doing that. But I'm such a wordsmith. Oh my goodness, Shar, I like edit something 17 times. So every post takes more time than I ought to. I hope I get better at this. But michalegabriel.com. And there's an opportunity to create a discovery call, to get on a call, and I have one-on-one coaching, online classes, various ways. We identify where you're heading and what you want to accomplish and what the deliverable is, and then we decide how best to work together to make that happen.
I love that. Thank you so much for honoring us with your
you.
time today, Michelle. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, I am so thrilled for you, and I'm going to be following your journey around the world, Shar. And I just say thank you for saying yes and for stepping out and doing this, because you're right. You are going to be impacting the lives of so many people. And when every time somebody says yes and puts the energy behind it, we talked about that, to make it happen, you're giving permission for someone else to do the same.
Love it.
That's what you're doing.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Michelle. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, babe. We'll see you. Bye.